Hey, I'm Lou. This is the second episode of our little cozy podcast. Today we're answering a question from Josue, who's asking, can you share a story and or tips on visiting a location for the first time that predominantly speaks your target language? So he says, I'm going to Barcelona later this year, so I started studying Catalan. Very exciting news, first of all. It's always super exciting to travel to a new place. I personally think deciding on going on a trip and planning for the journey is probably the hardest part, but it's also really fun if you can practice your target language on your way there. To answer your question, and maybe to answer it for other language learners who are wondering the same thing, I think the first thing to answer for me would be, what is your goal? I would assume that usually if you want to practice while you're in the country where they speak your target language, you probably want to learn a bit of speaking, which can be challenging to practice on your own. So if you're looking for some quick sentences to get you started and to make sure you don't feel too lost in this new country, I really recommend preparing a sort of a phrase book for tourism. So I did this when I went to Lisbon last year. It was my first time going to Portugal. And at first I thought, I'm already learning so many languages. There's no way I'm going to learn any Portuguese. But after just a few hours of landing in the city, I loved it so much. And I really wanted to get learning a little. So what I did was I prepared a few sentences that I had missed during my first hours there, where I just wish I knew how to say thank you with a good accent. I just wish I knew how to ask for the bill or for directions, things like that. So I made a little list and I asked a very good Portuguese friend to translate them and also pronounce them because the pronunciation can be a bit tricky and I didn't know much about it. And then I added them to a little Anki deck and I practiced with the pronunciation as well. So for these phrases, I didn't note too many because I was only staying for a few days, but I shared them on the newsletter, so I'll put the link down in the description if you want to use them. I don't have the translations for Catalan because I've never learnt it, but you can probably add it yourself, and I would recommend asking a native speaker, maybe online or someone you know, just to make sure you're not saying anything too awkward. And honestly, after I had learned just these few sentences in, I would say just maybe a few hours, it really made a difference. It was so much more enjoyable for me. I felt like I could share my appreciation, like my gratitude for being here and, the service and the kindness of people. And they were really happy as well that I was making an effort to say just a few words. It can also be tricky when you're an intermediate or more advanced learner and we want to take it to the next step. So I think the next step from simple phrases, simple questions and answers would be a small, maybe like a short conversation. And for that, I found that there's two things that I practice. First, like my daily practice in language learning is with flashcards, and I practice flashcard for conversation. So I have a prompt and maybe something that would come up in my head in English, like, I wish I could say this is delicious or this is a really good idea. And I would practice translating this sentence, or rather than translating, it's more like coming up with the sentence directly in my target language so that the next time I need it in a conversation, I just come up with it naturally. And I think once you build up kind of all of the sentences that you're listening to, sentences that you're learning because you need them in your little daily chats or in your practice. The thing that I lacked when I wanted to practice Korean speaking was a good icebreaker. And I know it sounds dumb, but I had been learning for years. I know I was like comfortable speaking about, daily things, language learning, hobbies, things like that. But when you encounter like maybe Korean tourists or something like that, I would find it so hard to start up a conversation. So I actually quite recently decided that I would find a few icebreakers to make sure, I'm not interrupting anyone, they're comfortable with me speaking Korean to them, and it doesn't seem too weird. My favorite I've tried, I think, is would you like me to take a picture of you? And especially for tourists, of course. They always really, really appreciate it, and the answer is really positive. I've never had anyone say no. And of course, since I asked them directly in Korean, they also immediately start up a conversation. And since Korean people are so warm and encouraging when it comes to speaking their language, it's always really motivating when you hear like, oh my god, your Korean is so good, are you from Korea, have you been to Korea, it's amazing. It's a good positive feedback to push me to maybe try to speak to more Korean people, even if it's hard at first. So I would definitely think about, like in your case when you're traveling, in which situations are you going to be where you could possibly talk to other people, in your case native speakers, and what will be some very easy icebreakers, little sentences you could say to start a conversation. If you love bookstores, maybe you can ask for recommendations for books and learn maybe a sentence to say, I've been learning this, or I'm interested in crime stories, things like that. If you're not sure, but you're definitely going to be trying some of the local foods, maybe look it up in advance and ask where you can have it, or if they have any recommendations. And maybe you won't understand everything and you won't understand all of the answers, but it's definitely an amazing way to get started. A very good memory I have from traveling to Italy was traveling by train, so from France to Italy. It was more than 4 hours, I think, maybe 5 hours. And there was a very kind Italian lady who was sitting next to me. She was an older lady and she was really polite, kind of shy. And at some point during our trip, I offered her some snacks and we ended up talking for about 3 hours with my broken Italian, but she turned out to be a teacher, a retired teacher, so she was so helpful, and I think I'll never forget this conversation. So it's also something to keep in mind. Public transport, if it's people who seem open to talking, like they don't have any earbuds or they're not on the phone, anything like that, it could be a good moment to start a conversation. Overall, I would say my biggest tip is be proactive, take the initiative. Like the fact that you're asking this question before going is such a good idea, because if you just go to the place and assume you're going to absorb the language by immersing in the country, sadly, I can attest that it does not work. It does not work. You really have to make an effort, go to people, and if you're being open, if you're prepared, if you have already a few sentences under your belt, I'm certain you'll have a lovely journey there, and you can even learn a bit while you're there as well. I would love to know what everyone thinks about this. So if you have any tips or advice, things that you tried while you were traveling to practice your target language, please feel free to leave them in the comments or by answering this email directly. Thank you again, Josue, for your very interesting question. And if anyone else has a question, please feel free to ask. Maybe someone else is wondering the same thing, so you might be helping them out by asking. And if not, I'll make sure to find something interesting to talk to you about language learning. See you next time.